The war had lasted only 19 days. Princess Valara remembered watching the final battles from the observation deck of her father's flagship. Earth's defenders had fought with everything they had. Their ships were slower, their weapons weaker, their shields thinner. But still they came, wave after wave, throwing themselves against the Khilaf armada like insects against a storm god. It had been almost beautiful in a sad way. Almost brave. Now, 3 months after humanity's surrender, Valara walked through the streets of a conquered city. Her advisors had chosen this place called Seoul for her educational tour. They said it was important for a princess to see defeated worlds up close, to understand how empire worked, to learn that weakness always bent before strength. The air was cold and gray. Valara pulled her silver robes tighter around her tall frame. Her skin, pale as moonlight, glowed faintly in the dim afternoon light. Behind her walked 6 guards in black armor, their hands resting on the energy weapons at their hips. Around them, the city moved in quiet misery. Humans shuffled past with their heads down. They wore simple clothes, gray and brown, nothing like the colorful images Valara had seen in the cultural databases. Their buildings still stood, but many showed scars from the invasion. Broken windows, burned walls, holes where weapons fire had torn through stone and metal. Valara studied the humans as she walked. They were so small. The tallest among them barely reached her shoulder. Their bodies looked soft, fragile, built from thin bone and weak muscle. They had no claws, no fangs, no armor plates, no venom glands. Their eyes could not see in darkness. Their ears could not hear distant sounds. They could not touch minds or move objects with thought like the Khilaf could dot by every measure the galaxy used. Humans were one of the weakest intelligent species ever discovered. Her chief advisor, an elderly Khilaf named Sorth, had explained this many times during her journey to Earth. They evolved on a gentle world, he had said. Mild temperatures, abundant water, plentiful food. They never needed to develop natural weapons because their planet gave them everything. They are creatures of comfort, Your Highness. Soft inside and out. Valara had believed him. Why would she not? The evidence supported his words. Humanity's military had crumbled in less than 3 weeks. Their colonies had fallen even faster. Now their homeworld belonged to the Khilaf Empire, and its people worked as laborers under imperial rule. This was the natural order. The strong ruled. The weak served. The tour brought Valara to a large building that had once been a sports arena. Now it served as a processing center where humans were registered, assigned work duties, and fitted with tracking implants. Thousands passed through its doors each day, emerging with small metal chips embedded in their wrists and assignments to farms, factories, or mines. Valara entered through a side door reserved for officials. Inside, the air smelled of sweat and fear. Long lines of humans stretched across the concrete floor, waiting their turn before registration desks staffed by Khilaf administrators. Armed guards stood at every corner, watching for trouble. As you can see, Your Highness, Sorth said beside her, the transition proceeds smoothly. Humans adapt quickly to their new circumstances. They understand the reality of their situation. Valara nodded, but something felt strange. She watched the faces of the humans in line. Yes, most kept their eyes down. Most shuffled forward in silence. But here and there, she caught glimpses of something else. A flash of anger quickly hidden. A jaw clenched too tight. Eyes that burned before looking away. These were not the faces of a people who had accepted defeat. These were the faces of people waiting for something. They hide their feelings, Valara murmured. Sorth waved a hand dismissively. A temporary response. Within a generation, they will know nothing but service to the Empire. Their children will grow up as proper subjects. This is how it always works. Valara was not so sure, but she kept her doubts private and continued her tour. The group moved through the processing center, observing each stage of registration. Humans stepped forward when called. They answered questions. They held out their wrists for the implant injectors. They accepted their work assignments. Everything happened in quiet order, until it did not. They reached a section near the back of the arena where newly processed humans waited for transport to their assigned locations. About 200 people stood in loose groups, guarded by a dozen Khilaf soldiers. Most sat on the ground or leaned against walls, exhausted and defeated. Valara's arrival caused a ripple of movement. Word spread quickly, and humans began dropping to their knees. This was required behavior in the presence of Khilaf royalty. Failure to kneel was punishable by beating or worse. One by one, the humans went down. Old and young, men and women, all pressing their knees to the cold floor and lowering their heads. All except one. He stood near the center of the group. A young man, maybe 25 years old by human counting. He had black hair cut short and a face that might have been handsome if not for the bruises already marking his skin. He wore the same gray clothes as everyone else. He carried no weapons, no tools, nothing that made him different from the hundreds around him. But he did not kneel. Valara stopped walking. Her guards noticed the standing human and reached for their weapons. "You there," one guard shouted. "On your knees before the princess." The young man did not move. He stood with his arms at his sides, his back straight, his eyes forward. He looked directly at Valara, and she felt a shock run through her. No human had met her gaze since she arrived on this world. They all looked away, looked down, looked anywhere except at their conquerors. This one looked at her like she was just another person. Like her title meant nothing. Like her power meant nothing. "Kneel," the guard commanded again, stepping forward with his weapon raised. Still the human did not move. "Make him kneel," Valara heard herself say. She did not know why she gave the order. Curiosity, perhaps. She wanted to see what would happen when force was applied to this strange creature. 3 guards moved forward. The first one struck the human across the face with an armored fist. The young man's head snapped to the side, and blood flew from his split lip. But he did not fall. He turned his head back and continued looking at Valara. The second guard kicked his legs out from under him. The human dropped to his knees, but only for a moment. Before anyone could react, he pushed himself back up to standing. The third guard used his weapon like a club, bringing it down hard on the human's shoulder. There was a crack of breaking bone. The young man gasped in pain, his face going white. But he remained standing. Again and again the guards struck him. They broke his ribs. They split the skin above his eye. They hit him until he fell, and then they hit him more. The other humans watched in horror, some crying, some looking away, some staring with something that looked almost like hope. Finally, the guards stepped back, breathing hard. The young man lay on the ground in a pool of his own blood. And then, slowly, impossibly, he began to rise. It took him a long time. His arms shook. His legs trembled. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds. But inch by inch, he pushed himself up. First to his knees, then to one foot, then to both. He stood. Valara stared at him. Her hearts were beating fast in her chest. She had seen many things in her life. She had watched conquered species beg for mercy. She had seen proud warriors break under torture. She had witnessed entire planets surrender rather than face destruction. She had never seen anything like this. "What is your name?" she asked. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. The young man coughed blood, then spoke in a rough voice. "Park Taiho. Why do you not kneel, Park Taiho?" He looked at her with those steady, terrible eyes. "Because you have not earned it." Valara felt something cold settle in her stomach. It was a feeling she had never experienced before. She would later learn that humans had a word for it. They called it doubt. The medical unit healed Pak Tayo's body in 2 days. Khilaf technology could repair broken bones and torn flesh with ease. What it could not repair was his spirit, because his spirit had never been broken. Valara had given orders to bring him to the administrative compound, where she was staying during her tour of Earth. She told her advisors that she wanted him as a servant. She said it would be amusing to have the defiant human wait on her, to humiliate him by making him perform simple tasks for the princess he refused to kneel before. This was a lie. Valara wanted to study him. She had conquered people before. Or rather, her family had, and she had observed the process. Every species reacted to defeat in similar ways. First came shock, then grief, then acceptance, finally cooperation. It was a natural pattern, as predictable as the movement of planets around a star. Tayo did not follow this pattern. He had lost everything: his world, his freedom, his future. He had been beaten nearly to death for refusing a simple gesture. Any reasonable creature would have learned from this experience. Any reasonable creature would have decided that kneeling was a small price to pay for survival. But Tayo was not reasonable. He was something else entirely. On his first day as her servant, Valara tested him. She ordered him to kneel before serving her morning meal. He refused. She had a guard strike him across the face. He took the blow without making a sound, then returned to standing. She tried again the next day, and the next. Each time, the result was the same. Tayo would not kneel. He would accept any punishment, endure any pain, but he would not bend after a week. Valara stopped trying. Instead, she began watching. Tayo performed his duties with perfect efficiency. He served meals at the proper times. He cleaned her quarters without complaint. He carried messages, organized documents, and completed every task she assigned. He was, in every practical way, an excellent servant, but he never lowered his eyes. He never rushed to please her. He never showed fear or desperation or any of the emotions she expected from a conquered person. He simply did his work and waited. "You confuse me," Valara told him one evening. They were alone in her private study, a large room filled with books and screens and comfortable chairs. Outside, the sun was setting over the ruined city. "You do everything I ask. You serve me faithfully, but you will not kneel. Why?" Tayo set down the tray he was carrying and considered her question. He always took his time before speaking, choosing his words with care. "Serving is work," he said finally. "I have no shame in work. My hands and my strength belong to you now because you have power over my body. But kneeling is not work. Kneeling is something else. It says that you are greater than me. It says that I accept my place beneath you. I do not accept this. But I am greater than you," Valara said. "My species is stronger, smarter, more advanced. We conquered your world in days. These are facts. Power and greatness are not the same thing." Valara leaned forward in her chair. "Explain." Tayo was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke in a voice that was calm but heavy with feeling. "Before the war, I was a soldier. My unit was sent to defend a city in the south when your ships came. We knew we could not win. Our weapons were toys compared to yours. But we fought anyway. Do you know why?" Valara shook her head. "Because the people in that city could not run. There were hospitals full of sick people, schools full of children, old people who could not walk. If we did not fight, they would all die. So we fought." He paused. "My sister was in that city. Her name was Park Yuna. She was a nurse. When the fighting reached the hospital, she stayed with her patients instead of running. She died protecting them. Valara said nothing. She found she could not look away from Taiho's face. Your empire has great power, Taiho continued. You have ships that cross between stars, weapons that can destroy cities, technology that seems like magic. But power is just a tool. What matters is how you use it. My sister had no power. She was small and weak and afraid. But she used what little she had to protect people who needed her. That is greatness. Your empire uses its power to take from others, to hurt, to rule by fear. That is not greatness. That is just strength without honor. Valara wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that the Caliph Empire brought order to chaos, that conquered species eventually prospered under imperial rule, that the violence of conquest was temporary, but the benefits were permanent. These were things she had been taught since childhood, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she asked another question. Do all humans think as you do? Taiho almost smiled. It was the first expression other than calm or pain that Valara had seen on his face. No, he admitted. Many of my people are tired. They want only to survive, to protect their families, to live another day. They will kneel if it keeps them safe. I do not blame them for this. Everyone must choose their own path. Then why do you choose the hard path? What do you gain from suffering? I gain nothing for myself. But others gain something from watching. Valara frowned. What do you mean? Taiho looked toward the window. The last light of the sun was fading. In the distance, Valara could see other humans moving through the streets, returning to their shelters after a day of forced labor. When I stand, Taiho said softly, others remember that standing is possible. When I refuse to kneel, others remember that they too can refuse. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the memory stays with them. It grows, it spreads. This is how my people have always survived. Not through strength alone, but through memory. Through hope passed from one person to another, like fire passed from torch to torch. Valara thought about the humans she had seen in the processing center. The hidden anger, the clenched jaws, the eyes that burned before looking away. She thought about the way the other servants in the compound had begun to change over the past week. They still bowed when she passed, still kept their eyes down. But their backs were straighter than before. Their steps were quicker. There was a different quality to their silence, something that felt less like fear and more like waiting. Something was spreading, something her advisors had never warned her about. You are dangerous, Valara said quietly. Taiho turned back to look at her. I am one man with no weapons and no power. I cannot hurt you. You are not trying to hurt me. You are trying to change something. Valara stood up and walked to the window. My empire has conquered many species. They resisted first, always. But eventually, they stop. They accept their place. They become loyal subjects. In a generation or two, they cannot imagine any other life. Perhaps those species did not have fire to pass. Valara turned to face him. And humans do? Taiho nodded slowly. We have been passing fire since before we could write. Our history is full of darkness, slavery, war, famine, times when it seemed like hope itself had died. But always, someone kept a small flame alive. Someone remembered that things could be different. Someone refused to forget. And in time, that small flame grew into something that could not be stopped. He met her eyes, and Valara saw no anger in them, no hatred. Only a quiet certainty that frightened her more than any weapon. You have conquered our bodies, Taiho said. You rule our world. But you have not conquered our fire. You cannot. It does not live in a place you can reach. Valara stood in silence as Taiho picked up his tray and left the room. She stayed at the window for a long time, watching the lights come on across the city as night fell. For the first time in her life, she wondered if her empire had made a mistake. The trouble began in the factories. It started small. A machine would break, and no one could explain how. Shipments would go missing between one checkpoint and the next. Workers would complete their tasks exactly as ordered, but somehow the results were never quite right. Nothing that could be traced to any individual. Nothing that could be punished. Just a slow grinding resistance that cost the empire time and resources. Then, the stories started spreading. Valara first heard about them from a frustrated administrator who came to complain about falling productivity. He spoke of whispers passing between human workers, tales of a man who could not be broken, a soldier who refused to kneel before a princess and lived, a servant who looked at the Caliph royal with steady eyes and spoke to her as an equal. "They call him the standing man," the administrator said with disgust. "They tell his story in the shelters at night. They say he proves that humans cannot be truly conquered. It is poisoning their minds, Your Highness. They are becoming difficult to manage." Valara listened without expression, but inside she felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was alarmed. Another part, one she did not fully understand, felt something that might have been admiration. Lord Rethon was less conflicted. The governor of Earth had ruled 3 conquered worlds before this one. He was old, cold, and practical. When he heard about the standing man, he did not see a curiosity or a puzzle. He saw a threat that needed to be eliminated. The human must die publicly, he announced at a meeting of senior officials. Valara attended as an observer, as was appropriate for her educational tour. "We will make an example of him. Show these creatures what happens to those who refuse to submit." "With respect, Lord Governor," Valara said carefully, "the human has broken no laws. He completes all his assigned work. He has not encouraged violence or rebellion." Rethon turned to look at her with eyes like chips of black ice. "He refuses to kneel before imperial authority. That is rebellion enough. More importantly, he has become a symbol. Symbols must be destroyed before they grow too powerful. Perhaps there is another way. If we simply ignore him. Ignore him?" Rethon's voice sharpened. "Every day he stands is another day that humans remember standing is possible. Every day he serves you without bowing is another day they believe they can serve without surrendering their spirits. No, Your Highness. This ends now." Valara wanted to argue more, but she saw the other officials nodding in agreement. She was a princess, yes, but she was also young and far from home. Her power here was limited. That night she went to Taiho's small room in the servants' quarters. He was sitting on his narrow bed, reading a worn book with paper pages. He looked up when she entered, but did not stand. "They are going to kill you," Valara said, without greeting. Taiho closed his book slowly. "I know. I have heard the whispers. You do not seem afraid." "I am afraid." He said it simply, without shame. "I do not want to die. There are still things I hope to see. Still people I hope to find." He paused. "But fear and surrender are not the same thing. I can be afraid and still refuse to kneel." Valara sat down in the small chair by his door. The room was tiny, barely large enough for the bed and a small shelf. But Taiho had made it his own. There were pictures on the wall, drawn on scraps of paper. Faces of people he had known. Scenes from places he remembered. "Tell me about your sister," Valara said. Taiho's face softened. It was the first time she had seen him look anything other than calm or pained. Yuna was 3 years younger than me. She was small, even for a human. Quick to laugh, quick to cry. She felt everything deeply. He smiled at a memory. When we were children, she would bring home injured birds, sick cats, any creature that needed help. Our mother would complain about the mess, But she never made Yuna stop. She became a healer, a nurse. She worked in a hospital for children with serious illnesses. She would spend extra hours with them, reading stories, playing games, holding their hands when they were scared. Taiho's voice grew thick. When the invasion came, the hospital was told to evacuate. But there was not enough time, not enough transport. Yuna stayed behind with the patients who could not be moved. She said she would keep them safe until help came. But help did not come. No, your soldiers came instead. Taiho looked down at his hands. I do not know exactly what happened. I was fighting on the other side of the city. But I heard later that she stood in front of the ward where the children slept. She had no weapons. She could not have stopped anyone. But she stood there anyway. Valara felt something twist in her chest. It was an unfamiliar sensation. She thought it might be shame. What happened to the children? She asked quietly. Some were killed in the fighting. Some were taken to processing centers. Some. Taiho shook his head. I do not know. I have searched for months. The records are incomplete. I could help you search. Taiho looked up at her with surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Why would you do that? He asked. Valara did not know how to answer. She did not fully understand herself. She only knew that something had changed inside her over these months of watching this strange, stubborn human. He had shown her a kind of strength that had nothing to do with power. He had made her question things she had always believed. Because I think my empire has done terrible things on your world, she said finally. And because I cannot undo those things, but perhaps I can do small acts of, I do not know the word, making things less wrong. In our language, we might call it penance, or atonement. Valara nodded slowly. Yes, perhaps that. Taiho studied her face for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and touched her hand. It was the first time any human had touched her willingly. You are not like the others, he said. I have watched you too, princess. You ask questions. You listen. You think about what you see, instead of just seeing what you expect. I am still your captor. Your oppressor. Yes, but you are also someone who could become something else. That is more than most of your people can say. The next morning, Lord Rethan announced that the execution of the human known as Park Taiho would take place in 3 days. It would be held in the central plaza of Seoul, the largest open space in the city. All humans in the region would be required to attend. They would watch their symbol die, and they would learn once again that resistance was futile. Valara attended the announcement in silence. She watched Rethan describe the event with obvious satisfaction. She saw the other officials nod and smile, and she began to form a plan. She did not know if it would work. She did not know what it would cost her. She only knew that she could not stand by and watch this happen. Something had changed in her. Taiho had lit a small flame in her heart, and she could not let it go out in 3 days. Valara would have to choose what kind of person she wanted to be in 3 days. She would learn whether a princess could also have fire. The plaza was packed with bodies. 50,000 humans stood in the cold morning air, pressed together by guards who had driven them from their shelters before dawn. They stood in silence, their breath making clouds of white mist, their faces gray with fear and exhaustion. Around the edges of the plaza, Khilaf soldiers watched from elevated platforms, weapons ready in case the crowd turned violent. At the center of the plaza stood a raised platform made of black metal. It was simple in design, just a flat surface with a single pole rising from its middle. Chains hung from the pole, waiting for the prisoner. Beside the platform stood the executioner, a tall caliph in ceremonial black robes, holding a curved blade that gleamed in the pale sunlight. Princess Valara watched from a viewing balcony on the north side of the plaza. Lord Rethan stood beside her, along with other senior officials. They wore their finest robes and their expressions of calm superiority. This was, for them, a moment of triumph. A lesson being taught to a conquered people. Valara felt sick. She had spent the past 3 days preparing. She had searched through imperial law codes, looking for anything that might help. She had contacted advisors back on the Caliph homeworld, asking careful questions without revealing her purpose. She had barely slept, barely eaten, her mind racing with plans and backup plans. Now the moment had arrived, and she still was not sure if she would succeed. The crowd stirred as a transport vehicle arrived at the edge of the plaza. Guards opened its back doors and pulled out a figure in chains. Even from this distance, Valara recognized Taiho. He walked without help, though his steps were slow. They had not tortured him, at least. Rethan wanted him healthy enough to stand for his execution, healthy enough to be seen by all as he died. The guards led Taiho through the crowd. Humans stepped aside to make room, their eyes fixed on the man who had become their symbol. Some wept quietly, some stared with hollow expressions. But many, Valara noticed, stood a little straighter as he passed. They lifted their chins. They squared their shoulders. They looked at him not with pity, but with something that looked almost like pride. Taiho climbed the steps to the platform. The guards chained him to the pole, his arms stretched above his head. He did not struggle or cry out. He simply stood, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Valara on the balcony. He held her gaze for a long moment. She saw no blame in his eyes, no anger, only a quiet acceptance and something that might have been gratitude, as if he wanted to thank her for trying, even though she had failed. But she had not failed yet. Lord Rethan stepped forward to the edge of the balcony. His voice, amplified by technology, boomed across the plaza. "People of Earth, you have been gathered here to witness the consequences of defiance. The human before you has refused to submit to imperial authority. He has refused to kneel before his betters. He has spread poison into the minds of your people, making them believe that resistance is possible." Rethan paused, letting his words settle over the crowd. "Today you will see the truth. There is no resistance. There is no hope. There is only the Empire and those who serve it. This human will be given one final chance to kneel and beg for mercy. If he kneels, he will be allowed to live as a slave. If he refuses..." The executioner raised his blade. Rethan turned to look at Taiho. "Well, human, what is your choice?" The plaza was silent. 50,000 people held their breath. The wind had died. Even the sounds of the city seemed to fade away. Every eye was fixed on the man in chains. Taiho looked not at Rethan, but at the crowd. When he spoke, his voice was rough, but clear. "I have never knelt to power without honor. I will not start now." He paused, then continued in a louder voice. "I am not brave. I am afraid. But I would rather die standing than live on my knees. And I know that even if I die, something will remain. Because every one of you watching will remember this moment. You will remember that one of us refused. And that memory will live longer than any empire." He turned back to Rethan. His face was calm. "I do not kneel." The crowd made a sound. It was not a shout or a cry. It was something deeper, something that came from thousands of throats at once. A low murmur that rippled through the plaza like wind through grass. Rethan's face twisted with anger. "Very well. You have made your choice. Executioner, carry out the sentence." The executioner raised his blade, and Valara spoke. "Stop." Her voice cut through the air like a crack of thunder. Every head in the plaza turned toward her. The executioner froze, his blade raised. Rethan stared at her with shock. "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Valara stepped forward, her silver robes catching the light. Her hearts were pounding, but she kept her face calm. This was the moment. Everything depended on the next few words. "This execution cannot proceed," she said clearly. "This human is my property. He was assigned to my service by official order 3 months ago. I never authorized his arrest, his trial, or his execution. Under imperial law, no property of the royal family can be seized or destroyed without express permission from its owner." Rithan's shock turned to fury. "Your Highness, this is a matter of imperial security, which does not override property law." Valara's voice was ice. "I know the law codes, Lord Governor. Article 7 of the Imperial Property Act states clearly that possessions of the royal blood cannot be confiscated without consent of the owner. Article 12 states that any attempt to destroy royal property without authorization is an offense against the crown itself. Are you prepared to commit such an offense, Lord Rithan? In front of 50,000 witnesses?" She saw fear flicker in Rithan's eyes. Not fear of her personally. She was young, far from home, without real power. But fear of what would happen if he violated royal prerogative. The emperor was known for his harsh treatment of those who showed disrespect to the throne. Even if Rithan was right about everything else, he would face terrible consequences if he harmed the property of a princess without permission. "This is absurd," Rithan hissed, his voice too low for the crowd to hear. "The human is a symbol of rebellion. He must die, then ask my permission. And will you give it?" Valara met his eyes without flinching. No. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension in the air was so thick that Valara could barely breathe. She saw Rithan's hands trembling with rage. She saw the executioner looking between them, uncertain. She saw the crowd watching, not understanding but sensing that something important was happening. Finally, Rithan turned away. "Release the prisoner into the princess's custody," he said through clenched teeth. "We will discuss this matter further in private." Guards moved forward to unchain Taiho. The crowd stirred again, that low murmur rising. Valara saw confusion on many faces, but also something else. Something that looked like the first light of dawn after a long night. She had done it. She had saved him. But as she watched Taiho being led from the platform, she knew that this was not the end. Rithan would not forget. He would not forgive. She had made herself an enemy of the most powerful caliph on earth, and she had done it for a human who meant nothing to the empire. No, not nothing. Taiho meant something. He meant something to his people, and now, she realized with surprise, he meant something to her. Later that night, they stood alone in her quarters. Taiho's wrists bore red marks from the chains, but otherwise he was unharmed. He looked at Valara with an expression she could not quite read. "Why?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked when she offered to help search for the children from his sister's hospital. But now it carried more weight, thought Valara. Thought for a long time before answering. "Because you taught me something," she said finally. "You taught me that there is more than one kind of strength. And you taught me that I have to choose what kind of person I want to be. I cannot undo what my empire has done to your world. But I can refuse to add to the suffering. I can choose to be someone my people are not." Taiho nodded slowly. "You have fire now," he said softly. Valara almost smiled. "Perhaps a small one. All fires start small." He reached out and touched her hand, as he had done in his room days before. "Thank you, Valara. Not your highness. Not princess. Thank you, Valara." It was the first time anyone had called her simply by her name. She found that she liked how it sounded. 6 months after the day she stopped an execution, Princess Valara stood before the Imperial Council on the Caliph homeworld. The journey home had taken 3 weeks. She had spent most of that time preparing her report, organizing her evidence, and thinking about what she had learned on Earth. She knew that what she was about to say would not be popular. She knew it might damage her position, her reputation, perhaps even her future. But she also knew that she could not stay silent. The council chamber was vast and ancient. Pillars of black stone rose toward a ceiling lost in shadows. Hundreds of caliph officials sat in curved rows that circled a central speaking platform. At the far end, on a raised throne of silver and crystal, sat Emperor Theron himself. He was old, even by caliph standards, his once silver skin now pale as moonlight on snow. But his eyes were sharp, and they watched Valara with interest as she took her place on the platform. Princess Valara, the Chancellor announced, will now present her educational report on the conquered world designated Earth 7, commonly known as Earth. Valara bowed to her father, then turned to face the council. She had practiced this moment many times. But now that it was here, she found that she did not need her prepared words. She knew what she had to say. Honored council members, she began. I was sent to Earth to learn how conquered species behave under imperial rule. I was told that humans were one of the weakest intelligent species ever discovered. I was told that they would submit quickly, that their resistance would fade within a generation, that they would become loyal subjects like all the others before them. She paused, letting her words settle. I was told wrong. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Valara saw several officials frown. She continued before anyone could interrupt. Humans are not like the other species we have conquered. Yes, they are physically weak. Yes, their technology was inferior to ours. Yes, they lost their war in days. But none of this matters, because human strength does not live in their bodies or their machines. It lives in their minds, in their hearts, and something they call spirit. She touched a control on her robe, and images appeared in the air above her. Pictures she had taken during her time on Earth. Faces of humans at work. Scenes from the processing centers. Crowds gathered in hidden places after dark. I watched a man stand under a beating that should have killed him, and rise again when it was over. I watched servants in my own compound begin to walk taller, speak louder, simply because they knew one of their kind had refused to kneel. I watched stories spread from person to person like fire spreading from torch to torch, each telling making the flame brighter. The images changed. Charts now, graphs, numbers that Valara had gathered carefully over months. Productivity in human work camps has dropped by 20% since the conquest. Machinery failures have increased by 30%. Shipments are delayed, resources go missing, orders are completed wrong. None of this can be traced to sabotage. The humans are not openly rebelling. They are simply not cooperating. They do exactly what they are told, nothing more, nothing less. And somehow, nothing works quite right. Lord Rethan, who had returned to the homeworld before Valara, stood up from his seat. This is temporary resistance, he said sharply. It happened on other conquered worlds as well. In time, it fades. Does it? Valara turned to face him. I have studied the records of our previous conquests, Lord Rethan. The Volcari submitted within 2 years. The Morphans within 5. The Tesharon never resisted at all. But none of those species had what humans have. And what is that? Memory. Valara changed the images again. Now the council saw recordings she had made in secret. Humans gathered in small groups, their voices low, their faces lit by dim lights. They were telling stories. Humans passed their history from generation to generation through stories. Tales of heroes who fought against impossible odds. Legends of ordinary people who refused to surrender their dignity even when everything else was taken from them. They have been doing this for thousands of years. Long before they developed writing, they were keeping their history alive through spoken words passed from parents to children. She zoomed in on one face in the recording. An old woman with white hair and deep wrinkles. This woman was telling a group of young humans about something that happened on their world hundreds of years ago. A nation called Korea was occupied by a foreign power for decades. The occupiers tried to erase Korean culture, Korean language, Korean identity. They forced Koreans to take foreign names, to speak a foreign language, to bow before foreign rulers. Valara met the eyes of the council members. It did not work. The Koreans remembered who they were. They taught their children in secret. They kept their language alive in hidden schools. They waited. And when the occupation finally ended, they emerged with their culture intact, stronger than before. The occupiers are now a footnote in history. Korea still exists. She let the image fade. This is what we are facing on Earth. Not a species that will forget. Not a people who will surrender their identity. A civilization that has survived countless attempts to destroy it and has emerged from each one more determined than before. We can kill humans, yes. We can conquer their bodies. But we cannot conquer what lives in their minds. The chamber was silent. Valara saw some officials shaking their heads, others looking troubled, a few nodding slowly as if her words confirmed something they had long suspected. Emperor Theron spoke for the first time. "What do you recommend, daughter?" Valara turned to face her father. This was the moment she had been dreading. The moment when she had to say what everyone already suspected, but no one wanted to hear. "I recommend withdrawal." The chamber erupted. Officials shouted in outrage. Lord Rethon leaped to his feet again, his face twisted with fury. Even the Chancellor, normally calm, looked shocked. Valara raised her voice above the noise. "Not immediately. Not completely. But we must begin planning for an eventual departure from Earth. We can extract resources, establish treaties, maintain trade relationships. But the occupation itself is unsustainable. Every year we stay, human resistance will grow stronger. Every generation, more stories will be told. In time, perhaps soon, perhaps not for centuries, they will rise. And when they do, they will remember everything we did to them." "You suggest we fear these primitives?" Rethon demanded. "I suggest we respect them. There's a difference." Valara looked at him calmly. "The Khilaf Empire has lasted 10,000 years because we are wise enough to know when a conquest is not worth the cost. Earth will cost us more than we can afford to pay. Not in resources, but in something harder to measure. The humans will teach other conquered species that resistance is possible. Their fire will spread to worlds that have long since forgotten how to burn." She turned back to the council. "I have seen this fire with my own eyes. I have felt its warmth. It cannot be extinguished by force. It can only be starved by our absence. Leave Earth alone and perhaps, in time, they will forget their hatred. Stay, and we will create an enemy that will never stop fighting." The council debated for hours after Valara finished speaking. In the end, they voted to reject her recommendations. They called her young, naive, corrupted by sentiment. They said the occupation would continue. They said humans were weak and would eventually submit. But Valara noticed something interesting in the vote. Nearly a third of the council members had sided with her, more than anyone expected. And as she left the chamber, several officials approached her quietly, thanking her for speaking truth, even when it was not welcomed. Seeds had been planted. 1 year later, Valara returned to Earth, not as a princess on an educational tour, but as an ambassador seeking to establish better relations with the occupied population. It was a new position, created specifically for her, a compromise by an emperor who loved his daughter even when she frustrated him. She found Taiho waiting for her at the landing field. He was thinner than before, worn by a year of quiet struggle. But his eyes were the same, steady, calm, unbroken. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." Many people say things they do not mean. I am not many people. For the first time since she had known him, Taiho smiled fully. It changed his entire face, making him look younger, lighter, almost happy. No, he agreed. You are not. They walked together through the streets of Seoul. The city was still scarred, still occupied, still suffering under imperial rule. But something had changed. Valara could feel it in the air. The humans they passed stood a little taller. Their eyes held a little more light. The fire was spreading. They tell your story now, Taiho said as they walked. The princess who stopped an execution. The caliph who spoke truth to power. They say you have fire in you, same as us. Do you think that is true? Taiho considered the question carefully, as he always did. I think you are learning to burn, he said finally. It is a process. It takes time, but you have started. Valara looked out at the city she had helped conquer, the people she had helped imprison. She thought about her speech to the council, the seeds she had planted, the changes that might come in years or decades or centuries. She thought about Yuna, Taiho's sister, who had stood in front of children she could not save. She thought about all the humans throughout history who had passed fire from one generation to the next, keeping hope alive through the darkest times. She thought about what it meant to be truly strong. I want to help, she said. I know I cannot undo what has been done, but I want to help build something better. Will you teach me how? Taiho stopped walking. He turned to face her, and for a long moment, they stood in silence, looking at each other across the vast distance between their species. Then he extended his hand. Come, he said. There is much work to do. Valara took his hand. Together, they began to walk into the future. In hidden rooms across Earth, humans gathered to tell stories. They spoke of a soldier who would not kneel. They spoke of a princess who learned to see,